Hey, Polly.
Hey, Greg, how are you?
I'm doing all right. So today we have in-house.
Who's left?
So today we have Grace Ragazzino, and she is our Partnerships for Success coordinator here on Newport County. She's going to talk to us today about the differences between hemp and THC and all that fun stuff.
All right.
All right. So without further ado, joining us today on Totally Preventable, we have Grace Ragazzino, the Partnerships for Success coordinator for Newport County. Grace, how are you doing today?
Doing great. How are you guys doing?
Doing pretty good. Thanks for asking. To start us off like we normally do, Grace, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got to where you are today?
Yeah, so I graduated from the University of Rhode Island back in 2022. And then the following year after that, I enrolled in the Cannabis Studies Graduate Certificate Program. It was an online course that was one course at a time. It was really well illustrated. It was really well done, and I found it incredibly interesting. The field of cannabis has always been an interest of mine, coming from when I was 17 and 18 years old, experimenting as most high schoolers do. And then when I got to college, I realized how impactful cannabis was on myself, my social life, as well as my academic performance. So coming from an experience with substance use, I learned a lot about how medically beneficial cannabis can be, while also recreationally the dangerous parts of it as well.
Sorry.
I started at the Newport County Prevention Coalition about a year ago now, and I've enjoyed every minute of it. And it's really allowed me to use the information and the things that I learned throughout my undergraduate and graduate studies in a practical and really beneficial way.
Thank you.
Awesome. Rhode Island has legalized adult use cannabis more recently, but hemp-derived Delta-8 THC remains prohibited. Could you explain the rationale behind this distinction and its implications for youth access?
Yeah, so as most of us know, cannabis has been medically legal in a lot of states, dating back to, I believe, 2008 was the first notable medically legal cannabis state. Rhode Island has recreationally legal weed, but in 2018, they released a new farm bill, which effectively legalized the hemp plant. What an important distinction is between the two is that cannabis, which is also referred to as marijuana, that's what we know as weed, as grass, as all of the slang terms that you might use when you think about smoking weed. There are two different plants that come from the cannabis plant. There's the marijuana plant and there is the hemp plant. So the difference between the two is that the hemp plant has 0.3% THC and a heavier concentration of CBD, as compared to a traditional marijuana plant, which has higher volumes of THC in the content. So in 2018, they passed the farm bill to help farmers, actually, because hemp had a very wide margin of use between textiles, grain, and a lot of other things that ended up being more beneficial to farmers than harmful to the general public. So at the time, cannabis is and was still federally illegal from the marijuana standpoint, but they legalized hemp at a point where it can only have 0.3% THC. So when it comes to youth access, as of 2018, there wasn't a whole lot of really concerns with this because CBD is a non-psychoactive portion of the cannabis plant. It serves a lot more of the medicinal benefits that we see in research compared to THC. However, we're finding that the THC amounts grown in hemp, now we are, I think, 5 or almost 7 years after the bill was passed, we're finding that there's more irregularities coming from the hemp bill, and there's holes being poked in the hemp bill that are causing some issues.
Now, with the 2018 Farm Bill legalizing the hemp products, how is this affecting its availability of hemp-derived products in Rhode Island?
Yeah, so as of about 2 months ago here in Newport County, it was brought to our attention that there were THC beverages being sold in liquor stores and even some gas stations. What's concerning about this is the exposure to youth. So we know as adults, when you go into a liquor store, when you go into a gas station and you want to buy tobacco or alcohol, you get ID'd, you get carded. This is a process that most of us as adults know. Sometimes when you walk in, it's kind of based on how you look and how you present yourself, whether or not you will get carded. However, at dispensaries that you go and get your cannabis at, they have a much stricter ID check process. So here in Newport County, you get, I think we have 1 or 2 dispensaries, but you get carded at the door, and then you get carded again when you are purchasing. Your information gets inputted into a system to track how much product you're purchasing or how much you're carrying on your person at a time. And there's checks and balances to this. When we start seeing hemp products and THC containing products being sold in liquor stores and gas stations, we can almost entirely assume that the carding process is a lot less strict. So we all kind of know occasionally an underage kid will walk into a liquor store, get a case of beer, and walk out unscathed, hadn't gotten carded at all. And this could very well happen with THC products as well.
Another concern is that I know a lot of towns voted on whether they wanted dispensaries or THC stores in their towns,
Oh, yeah.
and they voted against it. And some of these towns are now carrying these THC products. So I'm not sure how many people are actually aware of this, right? Because it seems like another loophole.
Yeah, it definitely is a loophole with the Farm Bill. And we're finding that people don't know the difference, or they don't realize that, oh, this is totally different than what I would get at a dispensary. Because they don't know. There's not enough information being shared and spread out there to say, hey, this is not the same thing as what you would get when you walk into a dispensary. Or people are just saying, oh, cool, they can sell weed in liquor stores now. How neat.
Right.
You know, my local liquor store has a fridge with a big pot leaf on it. It just says drink weed. And it's a little bit concerning.
You're right. Some of the cans too look a lot like seltzers and other drinks. So,
Absolutely.
yeah, you need to be vigilant. Given the concerns about unregulated hemp-derived products being sold in various outlets, what measures are in place to ensure these products don't end up in the hands of underage individuals?
You know, as of right now, there are not a lot of things happening to mitigate this. We have been looking at a bill that was up for view as of last week, and it seems as of this morning, we found that it's pretty much dead in the water. So as of right now, there's not much happening to stop it, as long as we continue to kind of spread the word and say, hey, this is not regulated product. You know, this is not the same amount of testing that goes into the products that hit the shelves of dispensaries. If you look at the cans that appear in stores, these hemp-derived cans, the product labeling is comical. It's comically bad. There's no milligram dosage. There's a giant label that says this is not an FDA approved product. And you even look at the ingredients, and coming from my background, having studied cannabis, there are some words on there I've never heard of. So that in itself is concerning, not even just for youth, but for of age users. You know, if they say, oh, well, it's easier to just get my THC from a liquor store as compared to, you know, walking in and getting ID'd a billion times, they might say that, but they're not getting the same product. They're not getting the same sort of pure THC, no unwanted additives that they would get at a dispensary.
Now, along with your packaging comment, The studies have shown that cannabis-infused edibles normally come in bright colors and bright color packaging. Um, some may say that this imagery is, to engage youth. But how significant is this issue in Rhode Island?
It's pretty significant. I've seen images of products that look almost identical to, I'll use a Doritos bag, for example. I've seen edibles that look almost identical to a regular Doritos bag. The only difference is that it has that little circle with the pot leaf on it. Now, in Rhode Island, I haven't seen any of these directly, copying the sort of traditional snacks and candies and stuff. But to your point, there are colorful packaging out there. And to see a kid walking into their parents' kitchen and, opening the cabinet and seeing this brightly colored baggie just says gummies on it, or, it's all bright colored. If I were 10, 11, 12 years old, I wouldn't know the difference. Whether or not it was a medicine cabinet and I thought it was Flintstone gummies or something like that, I probably wouldn't know the difference. And we do see occasionally, the numbers are not staggeringly high, but we do see reports of hospitalizations from anywhere from infant to 12 years old ingesting cannabis products and ending up in the hospital for treatment. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of treatment that can be provided, thankfully, because cannabis is a relatively safe substance if something accidental were to happen. However, it's still concerning, to say the least.
Can you discuss the physiological impacts of THC infused products with flavors and designs reminiscent of popular candies and underage consumers?
Yeah, I mean, it's very similar to what we see in the vaping and even cigarette industry. Back in the 80s and 70s, you'd get commercials for cigarettes on Nickelodeon and on, Cartoon Network, on kids shows. You'd see commercials advertising cigarettes. And the same thing was happening with the vaping industry when I was in high school. They were product marketing people that look like teenagers, barely 21-year-olds using vapes. And they're doing the same thing with cannabis and these kind of gummies. They're using colorful packaging to appeal to the eye, and they're seeing it on social media as well. Their favorite influencers are using, and they're smoking, and they're eating edibles, and they're taking a gummy and saying, oh, I'm just gonna chill now. And there's influence there. There definitely is, especially in the social media era today.
Now, on college campuses, like, how do peer influence and campus culture contribute to like the normalization of THC products?
In Rhode Island specifically, we're an ocean state. We have campuses right on the coast, and a lot of that sort of beach vibe, that surfer vibe, also kind of correlates to stoner vibes. I can't speak for every college student and say that there is direct peer pressure and peer influence. When I was in college, I was surrounded by it all the time. People on campus would be sitting on the quad smoking a joint. You'd smell it sometimes walking to your car, or you'd go to a friend's house and somebody was sitting on the couch smoking. So it was a very normalized thing, and it still is, especially now that it's recreationally legal. It's becoming equivalent to alcohol in a sense that it's a normal sort of thing that people do. But the issue is that while we are starting to equate it to alcohol, we have to start treating it the same way that a lot of us in the prevention world treat alcohol. It's something that's okay to use and in moderation and with regulation, but we need to know the implications on the body and what it can do and how it can affect you. And there's not a lot of, there's research out there, but there is not a ton of it because simple fact, it's not federally legal yet. So we don't have the funding and we don't have the resources available to do the same studies that they do on alcohol.
With the with the rise of high potency THC, what health risks are associated with the use, particularly among young adults?
Yeah, you know what we see most in high potency THC use is this thing called psychosis. Now, while this is a very rare thing that can happen, it does happen. A lot of people in the cannabis industry will tell you it's a myth. It's not. With high potency THC comes a higher high, you know, and your brain is affected in a much different way than if you were to be, quote, microdosing with 5 milligrams, 10 milligrams. What we're seeing now is products that have upwards of 100 and 250 milligrams, which is 10, 15 times the recommended dose for beginner users. And with that comes with a lot of the stemming implications of this. So the brain can end up being triggered into a state of psychosis where there's a bunch of different symptoms. Some of them are hallucinations, some are auditory, visual. We had a speaker at the recent CADCA conference this year that spoke about her son who sadly committed suicide after smoking high potency dabs and fell into psychosis. And 3 days before he tragically ended his life, he told his mom, you know what, you were right. This weed is really messing up my brain.
Mhm.
And it's something that needs to be addressed and needs to be talked about, because like we see with alcohol, there are ways that you can fall addicted and there's ways that you can find yourself in trouble when it comes to use.
Are there any recent studies or statistics uh, that that highlight the impact of THC products and like especially on your mental health or your academic performance?
Yeah, I mean, personally, I can tell you right now, using THC really did impact my academic performance, and it impacted my mental health a lot. Coming out of high school, I was a stoner. I would label myself as such, and I found myself really not socializing in my freshman year of college the way that I should have been. You know, that's the time where you go and you make new friends and you grind really hard in your classes, and you go to parties, you know, you socialize, you make friends. All I wanted to do was sit on the couch with my stoner friends and smoke weed and do nothing. And I found that that was true. I was skipping class a lot and I was, you know, hanging out with the same kids. I wasn't really making that many friends. And you know, that's when I really raised the red flag on myself and said, I need to get my stuff together. When it comes to studies, again, like I said, that there's studies out there that show the effects, especially in youth and young adults. High rates of use affect motivation. It lowers your motivation. And it can affect your ability to focus, really, and your attention span. Again, though, there's only so much research being done because of the federal implications. And most of the studies that I have read in the last 3 to 5 years have noted the fact that, you know, yeah, we found this information. However, we still need more, you know, to really concretely say that THC and cannabis use affects mental health and academic performance. They need more to concretely say that, but the evidence is there.
How does the lack of consistent regulation across the states affect the safety and perception of hemp-derived THC products amongst youth?
Yeah. You know, California, in September of 2024, California banned hemp products from being sold. Excuse me. And when I read that, I thought to myself immediately about our legislation that just got kind of thrown out a little bit. I think the inconsistencies across states are damaging, to say the least. If California is banning one thing and Rhode Island is saying, yeah, sell it, whatever, what does that tell us? And what does that tell youth? Is that saying that California is, you know, less progressive than we are, or is it saying that they know the information? From my knowledge, California, it was one of the first states to legalize cannabis. And they have a lot of research being done. Same thing with Colorado and Oregon. So following their lead, from my perspective, is the right thing to do because they're doing the research. They have the knowledge out there. So it's damaging to say the least when there's misinformation or different information being shared. It can be confusing, especially for youth because they're still learning about this stuff too.
What role do educational institutions in Rhode Island play in educating students about the risks of THC products? THC infused products.
They play a huge role. I mean, these are the teachers are who students go to every single day. You know, this school is more or less your home away from home. And a lot of the times your teachers have the greatest impact on your students. So I think for them to fully understand what their students could be using, both in school and outside of school, I think it makes a really important impact on, their influence.
Considering the evolving cannabis landscape, what policy changes would you advocate to better protect underage individuals from exposure to THC products?
We need regulation on hemp products, absolutely. I think having them inside liquor stores and mom and pop shop gas stations is dangerous. I think it provides an outlook for youth to be able to get their hands on these kinds of products. Rhode Island is one of the few states that doesn't allow the sale of alcohol inside Walmarts and gas stations. So why are we allowing THC, even hemp derived? I think the landscape in cannabis is ever growing, but with that, we also need to understand the benefits and the harms that can come with, legalizing this product. We have a lot of information on alcohol. We don't have a lot on cannabis, and yet they're still being held at the same sort of level.
Looking ahead, how can communities and policymakers collaborate to create a safer environment that minimizes the appeal and accessibility to THC products?
Share information. The cannabis industry, I've said it a couple times now, but it is ever growing. Youth use is something that is totally preventable, and it's something that needs to be done in a collaborative way. That way the correct information is being shared, and more people have knowledge of it. That's really it. As long as everybody is kind of aware of what's going on. I've found in my experience in the last year working here, I underestimate how much people know, and I also overestimate how much people know. Some people don't even realize that hemp is different than cannabis, and that's totally fair, but we need to operate under the assumption that people don't know. That way we can provide the correct information.
Awesome.
I think this might just be a good place to say that we really are at the Prevention Coalition into sharing education about products and the safety of underage people, and just keeping our community safe. We often get labeled like bummers and the say no people, but we just want everyone to know everything about the products they're using and be safe and follow the laws and keep our young people safe.
Right.
Yeah.
We are just talking about underage use.
Absolutely. And, we are not, at least from my perspective, I'm not pro or anti-weed, but I am pro safety and keeping those things, regulated and letting people know what they're ingesting. I think that's a really important part about living life. Know what you're putting in your body.
I think that's a great saying, pro safety, because I think that's what we all should be. So thank you very much, Grace.
Thank you guys for having me.
Our pleasure. Thank you for enlightening us. I know I'm much more informed about the differences between THC and cannabinoids. I can't even say the word.
Cannabinoids.
Cannabinoids.
Oh, if you can't say it, I can say it.
But thank you. I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, thanks for making the trek all the way here. To
Oh
the
yeah,
studio.
so far, about 5 feet. Thank you.
Thanks, Grace.